So I'm invited to a lot of um, projects where they're implementing agentic AI. They're looking at the technology. They're trying to figure out how to implement it, number one, and also how to account for the FinOps operation stuff. How do they extend the current FinOps infrastructure, FinOps thinking, FinOps culture, to the agentic based stuff? And by the way, enterprises, if you think that there's a big party going on, everybody's building agentic AI systems and you haven't been invited, that's typically not the case. So even though there's a amount of industry hype that's out there, there is not a lot of actually deployment of this stuff going on. And when you do see it, it's typically going to be misapplied. You have to go in there and kind of redo it. So we're not in a space where this is inflecting yet. We're in a space where people are just getting their generative AI systems, typically beyond the prototypes, up and running. They're looking at agentic and looking at the value of it. And they're looking at taking the models to different dimensions, inclusive of FinOps, which is really what we're talking about here. So I'm talking about forward-looking stuff in this presentation. I'm not talking about stuff you can buy on the shelf today. I'm talking about, in the back room and looking at the roadmap charts of the various FinOps, FinOps technology providers out there. And some of you guys, have written some stuff that I've been, lurking on and things like that, and just trying to figure out where the trajectory is for this stuff and take a look at it. So agentic FinOps has risen up around a couple of things. Number one, we're interested in using autonomous agents. And those of you as old as I am know that this stuff, even though there's new concepts out there and how we're defining agentic, it's basically older technology that's been recast and redesigned, for a new world where generative AI and AI frameworks are there. And basically the idea is, I'm not going to give you an agentic engineering or agentic architecture class here, but what we're doing is we're componentizing small language models into agents where they have an autonomous capability and they actually have their own personas and they're able to act on their own behalf. They're able to make decisions. They're able to have actions that are in there, and they're able to operate in many instances almost like a company. The way I explain it to people who are trying to learn agentic AI, think of agentic AI systems as a company. We hire a chief financial officer, we hire a CEO, or hire a CTO, we hire a leader of sales, things like that. If you turn those roles or personas into agents, you kind of got what it is. Every one of those things has their own expertise and capabilities. They have their own goals and objectives. Obviously, the objective of the sales manager is to increase sales. And they're able to make decisions based on those things to run a system. In this case, we can define it as a company, or run any kind of organization, or run any kind of application or system that has common objectives. And that's the benefit of it. Now, many of you are thinking the same thing I do. And obviously, I'm a agentic AI SME, but I'm also a agentic AI skeptic. Those are only going to have applications in just a few problem domains. And I think that's what we're finding out there. However, if you look at the capability to take an agentic approach to FinOps, there are some opportunities there. Not saying you go lock, stock, and barrel into the technology. That's never a good idea. We're kind of paying the price for cloud computing right now and trying to normalize those sorts of things. But we're able to leverage them in a way that's going to add value. So they have autonomous agents. Generative AI integration is going to be part of it. They're either abstracting large language models, or they're leveraging large language models, typically remotely. They're not large language models in most architectures that I worked on don't become agents. If there's any kind of an AI capabilities in the AI agents, it's going to be a small language model. Able to leverage reinforcement learning, able to continuously learn from outcomes, optimize strategies through trial and error and feedback. And the autonomous nature of them really provides the most power. It also provides the most danger because, as we saw a couple of months ago, someone built an agentic AI system. It deleted all their data, then lied about it. And that's because we're not designing these things typically to be trusted. We're designing these things to typically carry out a set of procedures, a set of behaviors. And when we're looking at deploying any agentic framework, where it's going to be around FinOps, or something that's an accounting system, inventory control system, supply chain integration system, things like that, agentic AI systems typically are going to take much more time and effort to make them work. They're much more complex. They have many moving parts. The distributed nature of them makes them extremely complex. And also they can be dangerous, as we saw when the agent deleted data, because if we're giving them the roles and responsibilities, we're also giving them access to very company resources. They're going to be dynamically thinking and changing their knowledge of things over time. That's a real advantage. It's also a real danger. So we have to kind of keep that in mind as we're moving forward. So not promoting agentic AI for everything and anything. I think in a certain domains, which we'll identify in this presentation, it's going to be just fine. But in many instances, it's going to be something that should probably not be looked at least in 2025, 2026. And then kind of that's blasphemy out there compared to all the agent washing that's going on. And everybody wants to get on my calendar to talk about their agentic AI technology, but I truly believe that's where we are right now. So core capabilities and how does it transfer operation? Well, the real-time decision-making, I think, is going to be a core capability in building in these systems. And again, if some of the FinOps tools and technologies out there, they start adopting agentic features and functions, agents can look at cloud platforms in real time using telemetry and business metrics and make key decisions in a very short period of time. So in other words, you have an agent that is assigned just to dealing with the storage systems on a particular cloud provider. It's able to dynamically see how much resources we're consuming and the price of those resources, the cost of those resources as we consume them, and make adjustments up and down as needed if they're allowed to do so. And that provides key capabilities. So you're not going back to a centralized system that's only going back to those resources to adjust them, every 24 hours, every 48 hours, and typically it's going to be every month. You're able to do it dynamically as you need them. That's kind of taking things to the next level. And also you have to consider things like, the agreements you have with the cloud provider and your ability to do that and actually gain certain cost reductions from it. Those things are there. But just the fact of the matter that I can use FinOps in a way that is going to be real time, able to make millisecond decisions, that's kind of a game changer based on some of the limitations as I'm rolling out these projects. And my time at Deloitte as a chief cloud strategy officer in making those core architectural patterns known. Self-service recommendations, you're able to not only find an issue with some sort of overage or underage or some sort of inefficiency with a particular resource, but you're able to communicate directly with the engineering team in terms of what needs to be fixed, how to fix it, and how to implement it. So it's not only just infrastructure as code, but the ability to have infrastructure as recommendation or code as recommendations. Proactive cost optimization, the ability to, in essence, look in real time at the problems and automatically implementing, cost optimizations and in ways in which they're going to be quicker because, again, we have an agent. Single agent was going to be assigned to a particular set of resources. And then continuous learning. It's feedback loops of these systems. This is kind of where the value of them is going to be. It's not going to be just setting them up with a set of static policies in terms of cost governance within a FinOps system, but the ability to kind of make core decisions moving forward based on how things are changing. Obviously the cost policies, the pricing models, all those sorts of things are going to be a dynamic typically within a cloud provider. Also consuming and dealing with internal systems. This is going to be something that will allow us to see that coming, make a decision based on those things happening without having to go out to a human, without having to go out to a series of static policies, and the ability to optimize whatever resources you're consuming for the business. And this is all good news if we're able to adopt this. So autonomous cost optimization ultimately is what we're going for here. So they're able to look at how organizations are able to manage cloud resources, and I would extend that to on-prem resources as well, traditional computing, private clouds, sovereign clouds, neo clouds, all those things are really on the table here. And they're able to continuously monitor the workload, and they're able to make decisions without manual intervention. This is the core thing we're trying to pull off. Right now, everybody is talking about the ability to proactively automate the optimization of these systems. I've heard about that for a long period of time. the problem is when you implement that, it's typically harder than you think. And many of the tools support it in different ways. And also, many of the organizations that I work with don't really have the culture to accept the fact they're going to allow these tools to automatically optimize these systems without a human looking over the shoulders as to what's going to happen. In many cases, like we saw this week with the Amazon outage, they're going to have too much riding on the cloud, and the applications are running on the cloud, where they're just not going to let it happen. Well, this provides us with a core value of doing that, because if we're able to pull this off, and you do it right, the thinking and automation should be far superior of any human beings that are looking over the shoulders. So we're definitely going to have a human in the loop with these sorts of things, but the idea is to engineer the human being out of the loop, because ultimately they become the latency, they become the points of failure, because they're making the most decisions. And if you set them up right, that's going to be the case. That doesn't mean we do away with humans, and we do away with engineers and architects and things like that. Very much have a role. AI is about automating tasks. It's not about eliminating humans. And this would provide us with the ability to automate a task that is going to be better if used with this kind of technology than not. Dynamic pricing optimizations, they can look for spot instances or reserve capabilities, things like that, and then make the appropriate decisions as to whether or not we should leverage it or not. Obviously, there's a complex array of things that we think about. If we're looking at leveraging opportunities to reduce costs within some of these large cloud providers, very complex pricing models, very complex ways in which we're able to leverage spot instances and other saving opportunities. And it is able to look at not only the particular instance or opportunity of saving the money in one particular piece of time, but the ability to look at all of the other systems, communicating with all the other agents, and having a coordinated activity, or basically instantaneous meetings, so to speak, in a virtual conference room, in terms of what it's able to do, how it's able to carry it out, what are the current policies, is there a consistent decision or a consistent opinion that everybody has, and the ability to take it forward that way. So also, intelligent forecasting and enhanced visibility is a big thing moving forward. So FinOps observability, the ability to kind of see things that are going on and understand why those things are occurring, is a core struggle I think many organizations are still dealing with now. No matter if they have the good sound FinOps observability tools and a good FinOps program, but it's just something that's very difficult for them to get to. So their visibility is a core challenge within many of these organizations that I'm working with that have either moved to the cloud or are moving to the cloud. So static budgets, fail in dynamic cloud environments. That's the end state of this. And so if we set up static policies and the cloud environment moving into is going to be very volatile and dynamic, then we're going to have a very hard time keeping up with that. And that's typically the way people roll out FinOps, is using static policies, static procedures, things like that. Everything is around rules, doing things, process, that kind of stuff. And I understand why that is, because we want to have direct control over those cost resources. But you're not going to be able to get to, any state of price optimization in those kinds of ways. You're going to have some sort of a dynamic capability, which is going to follow the dynamic nature of these cloud models out there. So the ability to put volatility, in essence, into a domain. So in other words, if the cloud usage, these cloud architectures, these cloud configurations out there, with thousands of engineers that are redeploying, resetting, reallocating, building systems around them, and that's going to be something that's going to be constant change. That's going to be volatility. We have to put volatility into a configurable domain. And in many instances, an agentic-based framework would be better at doing that, because we're able to assign an agent that is monitoring and dealing with a particular set of resources, or even a single resource, onto itself. And we're able to allocate as many agents that are needed to deal with whatever complexity and whatever dynamic nature of these cloud providers have. And so that provides us with a core capability that I see limiting a lot of FinOps, FinOps programs right now. So confidence aware models, real-time adjustments, scenario planning, confidence intervals, able to communicate, uncertainty with risk and predictions, and the ability to kind of take a chance or risk on various things. Your ability to experiment, your ability to do some trial and error and do so automatically within the domain of these agents, where they're able to, in essence, take on the role that they have to optimize the cost. And there could be hundreds of the agents working together in a multi-agent system that are looking at the opportunities to tune, looking at the opportunities to reduce, looking at the opportunities to optimize. Many things that are very hard to take advantage of is if we're just falling back to static rules and processes. So we're going to have to unthink, some of the things I think we've been thinking about for the last 10 years and rethink, some of the innovations that we can leverage here. They're not going to be easy to implement. They're not going to be foolproof. But I think in a few years, they're going to get us to a better state than we are now. So humans, the big issue here is how do you layer this into a culture? How do you layer this into human beings? People are already taught to do FinOps in a certain way, which I think is a good way. We know how to put procedures and processes and rules and approaches and methodologies and how we're going to manage costs within a cloud environment, even non-cloud environment as well, enterprise in how they consume money. But how do we change from the traditional approach to an agentic approach? Well, everything was in traditional FinOps, which is kind of what we're running today. At least all my clients are. They're going to be siloed. They're going to do, typically near time, cost accounting, things like that, and use traditional tools, use FinOps tools. But in many cases, it's kind of falling back to spreadsheets and things like that. And that's how FinOps is being done in the real world these days. Transition phase would be look at hybrid workflows, agent supervision, vision, policy definition, trust building to move to an agentic FinOps where the ability to deal with governance, exception management, cross-functional orchestration, business alignment would be the policies, the culture, the way in which we get things done into the future. And I think this really kind of is the path that we're moving toward at this particular time. If you look at the FinOps technology providers out there, people that are kind of leading the industry in tools that we're all following and considering that they're moving into creating kind of a functional technology standard, I think in many instances, they're going to have to rethink in how they've done stuff in the past because of this new opportunity, because of the new way that we're going to identify and we're going to leverage cloud resources. You got to remember, we're moving to a distributed, complex, heterogeneous world. We're moving away from a single cloud provider. If that decision wasn't made before, it was made this week by many people out there who suffered through the AWS outage. And so it's not going to be 3 or 4 clouds in a multi-cloud deployment. It's going to be 10, 15 clouds, specialized clouds, neo clouds, sovereign clouds. All these things are really going to be in the portfolio of many of these organizations. So this is adapting to that, understanding that we're going to have to deal with complexity through abstraction. We're going to have to deal with complexity through automation. And I think it's going to provide us with a better opportunity to be successful at FinOps. So the new practitioner, we're evolving from the cost accountant, strategic agent supervision, which we're dealing with today, to basically defining policies, setting guardrails, managing exceptions rather than generating reports. And we're focusing on shift from the role of data collection, high-level governance, strategic planning, and cross-functional collaboration by basically implementing these in agentic-based frameworks. So it's going to bridge, or at least we hope, at least the idea of this is going to bridge the divide between DevOps, finance, business units, and how all these stuff really kind of comes together and how it can be functionally more valuable for us. If anything I hear out there as people are deploying FinOps systems and developing FinOps programs, it's the fact of the matter is that the technology is moving so fast, and certainly the move to AI, that the FinOps programs don't necessarily keep up with it. That's not a dig on the FinOps leaders out there and the people who are implementing these things. That's just the fact of the matter is that many organizations are used to innovating and moving fairly quickly, and the FinOps organizations and the FinOps tool systems, processes, procedures, things like that are struggling to keep up. So how does this technical architecture work? Well, you have a data integration layer, unified ingestion from billing APIs, application telemetry, all those sorts of things. You're able to do learning refinement, continuous feedback loops, retrain models, self-correct. In other words, always updating the system, not just training the model one time. but augmenting it ongoing. And so the small language models are able to keep up, they're able to understand the resource, able to understand cost optimization around those resources. Model orchestration, the ability to deal with agents that are all running their small language models, and the ability to leverage an execution engine that's going to provide scalability, cloud native agent mesh, API integration, implementing improved optimization. So the idea is that we're moving to a technology stack that's going to be flexible and dynamic versus static and inflexible, which is kind of what we're dealing with today and how we define FinOps. So we're truly able to move in that direction. I think the FinOps tools and the way in which we approach it have to provide the same sort of capabilities, or we're just not going to be able to keep up with the changes of technology. We're undergoing a huge shift right now, whether you've seen it or not. We're not moving to single cloud providers anymore. We're not trying to put everything on AWS. We're putting everything on the best of breed platform where it's going to bring the most value back to the business. That's going to be the best bang for the buck for the business. FinOps needs to keep up, and FinOps needs to have some dynamic capabilities that we need to build into these systems. And last slide. So risk, rules, road ahead. We can get to a 35% cost reduction if we implement this stuff, and that's pretty conservative. You're able to, sustain savings, 90 days of agentic system deployment. And this is the metrics that I'm seeing. Faster issue resolution. We're able to do things 80% better, 80% faster. Anomaly detection to remediation, and then 200 plus manual hours saved, ultimately per FinOps practitioner a month. Again, not engineering the human out of the process, but making their roles much more effective by leveraging a tooling that's going to be much more effective. We need to manage risk, agentic overreach, they delete data if they're allowed to. We need to understand that, giving a series of agents a mind of their own has some risk entailed. We need to figure out how to do that. Need to look at bias transparency, make sure we have ethical rules and regulations that come into this, regulatory compliance. Also, coming up to the next version of the stuff, the ability to have swarm intelligence, wisdom of the crowd, so to speak, having agents work together and share common knowledge frameworks, strategic value, industry standards, and emerging frameworks for responsibility in agentic systems. And with that, I will turn back.